Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Talking with Apes. Today, we will discuss the situation in Ukraine. We will go over the history. Is there someone who might be at fault creating this war? How are the refugees being welcomed from Ukraine compared to other refugees that we have seen? And how do we feel about it? And also, of course, as always, we try to look at what should happen next and is there anything you can do? So for the history, maybe I will hand it over to Tom at first because he is a history teacher. So impress us with all your knowledge.
That's a lot. Where do you? Well, in prehistoric era, there were people living in Ukraine.
No, I mean, let's start at the Soviet Union.
The Soviet Union collapsing, or Soviet
Yes.
Union. Because if you want to start the
The
Soviet
fall
Well-
of the Berlin Wall.
Jesus,
that's
that's
a bit
a
too-
various different points. Okay, wait.
yeah.
So, with this contemporary Ukraine or this nation state of Ukraine has been throughout the ages part of the Russian Empire, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It has been even further back a Mongolian Khanate, I believe.
Tartars.
Tartars.
I mean, that was the native population.
Yes.
Well, not of Ukraine, of Crimea, but you know.
And of course, when said socialist revolution happened in Russia, Mother Russia,
Rolling them R's real good.
yes. Eventually, Ukraine became part of the Soviet Union. It was one of the founding members of the Soviet Union, and remained a part of it for until it collapsed. Said Soviet Union.
Till death do us part.
Yes, exactly. And then it had a very shaky time and start as a nation state, an independent nation state.
Yes.
It did not, when the Soviet Union collapsed, vote to become a part of Russia, which was a choice that was presented at that time. But it chose to continue as an independent nation state. For as far as, of course, the people are presented with a comprehensive choice like that. It's more like left or right and not anything else. Since then, as the nation state Ukraine, it has been moving between Russia and the West being understood as like the USA and the emerging EU, the European Union, and the military alliance that connects both of them, NATO, yes. They have had presidents which leaned toward Russia and Russian agreements of cooperation with Russia. They've had presidents which leaned towards European cooperation and Western cooperation. Not that long ago, I believe in 8 years ago, you had the big protests and revolt, you can say, which installed the current regime in Ukraine, which is a pro-European regime. And that, of course, has not been to the liking of one Vladimir Putin, who, you know, to jump back a little bit, there might have been the expectation after World War II that both military alliances on East and West would dissolve. So NATO would dissolve and the Warsaw Pact would dissolve. But the Warsaw Pact dissolved and NATO did not. The Russians have since then always, or at least in recent decades, seen the expansion of NATO and the formation of the European Union and expansion of the European Union.
I'm Chernobyl.
As eating their geopolitical influence.
It's just a very, not to get right into it, but like from the Russians' perspective, it's okay. There's this land called Ukraine. It's literally the border between us and the West. And if they join,
it was them for a long time.
Yes, exactly. But like even if you're looking from the Russian state, because Putin is like, oh, Ukraine was a mistake. It's part of Russia, has always been. But for a while, Ukraine was, as all of the previous states in the Soviet Union,
so many of us
were seen as their own independent states with their own independent heritage and their independent languages.
Actually, less so than, for example, satellite states in, I believe, Chechnya and etc. and Yugoslavia. Well, Yugoslavia was really
Yugoslavia,
independent, but-
we're not going to get
Yeah,
into
no.
Yugoslavia.
But like for example, you had a lot of satellite states, but Ukraine was actually a part of the Soviet Union.
Yes.
So of the same
Yeah, exactly.
circumference on the map. Not even a satellite state. That was very short-lived. The Soviet Republic, I believe, of Ukraine. But yeah, from the perspective of the and with the leftovers of Russian imperialist thinking of like empire, big empire.
They lost.
There is an American empire encroaching upon them, because also don't forget that with the EU and the USA being in one military alliance, and the EU not really having its own foreign or international policy for decades, we do look
NATO
very
is-
much
Na-
like
NATO is the
part. We are satellites, probably in their eyes, of the USA, which
Yes.
isn't completely
That's how
incorrect.
Putin definitely sees it. Yes.
I mean, I don't think it's not
so-
that unfair.
No,
At least
there's an argument to be
military-wise.
made for it, definitely.
Militarily wise, yes.
Economically, politically as well. Like Brussels and
What's
Washington
left?
tend to agree on a lot of things. Trump, in that sense, was a bit of a break.
Right.
You severed some ties between Brussels and Washington.
Didn't he want to let the US get out of NATO?
Yes.
Can you imagine if that happened?
That would
Where would be
collapse
now?
NATO, because NATO is kind of built on the military dominance of the
Yes.
USA.
It does give credence to the whole idea of Putin might have been working with Trump. I'm a very smart detective. Yeah, so that's for the history. Basically, Ukraine, a state that have an ethnically, because the ethnics of it do matter, right? It's like if it was part of Russia or it was a part of Soviet Union, but there is a specific cultural field. They speak a different language. Ukrainian and Russian are not the same language.
But you have a substantial part of the population which speaks Russian, which
20%?
identifies still as Russian. That's also still a significant amount.
I mean, yeah, but
Probably
like that's
because-
also a thing in Belgium, right? But the Dutch
Yeah.
aren't going to invade us.
Yeah, but the
because
Belgian
we speak
government
this-
doesn't say that the only language of the land is French.
It did, and it had a big bad
Yes.
element going on. It led to its own revolt of and its own Flemish separatism
Yeah.
because of that.
Not to give too much get too much into that detail, because, like we said, it's
Basically-
that's the Russian story, right? We're going inside.
Yeah, all
to,
I'm saying, like, the reason I brought it up is, like, that's also something that Germany said when they started the Second World War. They were like, oh, but, like, the Austrians, they have they speak
Yeah,
German,
it's-
so we can just invade them, right?
It's an excuse. It's a casus belli, as they say, for many countries to do things, to start wars and start invasions like that.
you need a state story.
I also
right?
want to mention, for full historic completeness, that Russian population is also partially the result of active colonization by the Russians and
by active moving ethnically Russians, like moving, like,
genociding other people.
exactly.
Yes.
and forcing
Like
them out.
the
Yeah,
Tatars.
so
And then the Kremlin.
And then not
The
Crimea
Crimea, oh my God.
was invaded from directions from the Kremlin. Yes.
The Kremlin invaded Crimea. that's
how
what I
many
wanted
years
to say.
back is that? Is
I
that like
believe
10 years
8,
ago?
2014 about.
Yeah. So
8 years ago.
why exactly Russia would want that in materialistic terms is a bit above me, because that part of Ukraine is not incredibly wealthy or rich.
I mean, I think the main reason is because whenever a country has a border conflict, it's not allowed to join NATO, and Ukraine was already considering.
He's talking about.
it's been drifting, but specifically for taking Crimea, it's
Yeah,
interesting.
it's Crimea.
It could have been a motivation, but it definitely backfired, and the numbers don't really add up in that sense, because by removing Crimea from the Ukrainian nation state and the election cycle that happens therein, there are a lot
themselves in
less
the ass.
pro-Russian votes in Ukraine, so the Ukrainian state moved to
It
be
doesn't
more.
make sense if you look at
move to the west.
the move that they made now. It doesn't make sense long term for them to go for Crimea at the time. But maybe it wasn't the plan to go for
Well,
Ukraine.
the thing is,
eventually.
in 2008, there were some loose promises made to both Ukraine and Georgia by NATO to possibly be able to join.
okay,
After that, also the whole like Georgia conflict,
where does Crimea come in? Why would you take Crimea?
a border conflict, any border conflict
As tiny
creates.
show of force? I honestly don't know.
Doesn't remind me what was the West response for that?
Not that much.
Yeah, they didn't want to start a war with Russia. They put in sanctions, much less harsh than now, but there was sanctions.
Was there fighting on the border, or was it basically the Russians moved in? I guess.
I mean, there was
I
there's
literally don't
still
know.
like there the whole time there was like rebels who would go against it, but there wasn't as big of a fight as now.
Russia created a little bit of a fire, and then it was like, oh, well, there's a fire. Let us help you put it out. And then they went in, and then they didn't leave when the fire was put out.
Isn't it time to go home? Nah, I think I'm comfortable.
It might still be smoldering. We should maybe wait and see.
And then to get to current events, on the 24th of February 2022, Russia begins a large military invasion of Ukraine. And yeah, that's where we are now. We're seeing sanctions. We're seeing a lot of support for Ukraine, but also Ukraine has never been able to become part of NATO, so NATO doesn't intervene. And we're left in a situation where we can kind of just watch, or if you are one of the brave people who went to Ukraine to help their fight, you can obviously do that. Ukraine has issued that you can join them without needing any sort of visa, but that's obviously not a thing for everyone. So yeah, that's where we are now. It was a surprise attack. There was no official declaration of war. The surprise didn't work as well as they wanted to. They thought
Russia
that,
frames it as a special mission to
Yes.
denazify.
Peacekeeping denazification mission.
Yes. Which Putin seems to be losing the propaganda battle a little bit.
Yeah.
Matter.
With the Ukrainian president, who I have to say is seemingly very good in propaganda.
From a Western perspective.
Yeah, but no, in terms of like propaganda
I
battle.
mean, also in Russia, like
In Russia, it doesn't matter. Again, like the propaganda of the Russian regime has always been based on fear, and like the official story is always something that okay, it's a place like we need something.
yeah, and it happened.
Like, but nobody actually believes it.
The story spreads to other regimes which are friendly with Putin, like
Exactly.
like
Even Syria.
and that have isolated
Like
from
the Syrian government,
from the West.
the Syrian official news are like,
Actively
oh
by the
yeah,
West.
Ukraine is full of Nazis actually.
Yeah, but
And Bashar al-Assad like talked with Putin, and that's like it was actually Bashar al-Assad's advice to go and denazify.
yeah, but it still seems to be the exception in the and it seems to be limited to the friendly states. And it's remarkable how, for example, China and India are keeping a relative hands-off approach to this. They're not really coming to the rescue of Russia. And this,
Economically speaking, I do think like China will step in. Like it won't allow the Russian economy to collapse.
It didn't agree to sanction Russia the same way Western countries did, because let's be clear, while the West is full of glory announcing that the world is sanctioning Russia, it's mostly like the Western countries, which do make up a significant portion of the world economy. Let's not forget the G7 or G8 or G20
like the
are mostly white, and
biggest-
you have control over many international institutions.
the biggest trade partner of Russia is Germany. That's
Yes.
just fact. And there
But
was
still,
the-
India
yeah.
and China say they will not necessarily stop trading with Russia.
Probably
yes,
won't.
but also they are specifically targeting industries that China cannot provide as well.
Yes,
as,
yes. But like there is nuance in the effect of the sanctions as well.
But also, like, we can't deny that the Russian economy has just plummeted in the last
it has taken
days.
hits. Yes.
yes.
Like
but
30%
ours
down
is hit
within
by
like
it as well.
one
And
day.
democracy, well, Western economy is also hurt because of it, because we are in a
Yes.
global economy, less so than the Russian one, because of course Russia gets kicked out of the club and we are all still the club. But you also have to, it's not as simple as this will hurt the Russian economy, therefore be good. It also is an explosion that hits us to a certain degree, and Putin can, and his regime, like the Russian state, is of an authoritarian nature. It can go to people's door and say, we are confiscating this and this and this and this for the glory of the Russian state.
Again.
And you will say yes because you will have a machine gun pointed at your head. And Western people, like Biden, for example, he will have to go to Congress at some point and he will have to deal with his Congress. And if the congressmen and women in America,
The fact is, it's just like economic
this
sanctions
isn't,
are not
you
that as
know,
effective on authoritarian regimes. They're just not.
It is. Democracies are sensible to them as well.
Because the people will get tired and be like, hey, why is my eggs costing 10 times more?
Yeah,
You
and
can't say that in
have
Russia.
Actual, like you have an actual higher degree of responsibility towards a majority of your populace.
Of course, but if
Which I don't mean to say it won't work, but just we have to be aware that in the West, if this is going to be a long-term game, we should not be surprised if like Western democracies start to soften their approach after a while, because governments are thinking and politicians are starting to think about re-elections and they have to make other agreements in their parliaments, etc. It is a drawback of democracy.
I mean, yeah, right now I think it's the most we can do, I guess. And there is also a lot of pressure on politicians to not do nothing, because I feel like if you look at, the media, Zelensky is having
Zelensky
unparalleled.
being the Ukrainian president.
Yes, he is having, like me using his name like that means that
You know the Ukrainian president's name.
I did not ever know the Ukrainian president's name so far, but now I know because he's been so popular. He's all over the media. He his videos are going viral within hours. Every fucking thing he does is like, oh my God, the greatest man alive has done something, which is obviously propaganda. But that does create a lot of pressure to not let
It creates pressures on who?
on European politicians who don't want to lose votes by not doing anything.
I mean, who are you going to vote for? Zelensky?
No, but you're going to vote for the politician who helps your hero as he's being portrayed.
I guess. But I do assume, at least if you're a rational voter,
Oh,
you're
people are not rational voters.
you're like, which candidate is protecting our economy more? Not going and tweeting, yes, Queen Zelensky.
And
I'm sorry, it does annoy me sometimes, this whole response of oh my God, he is such a Marvel hero. This is
Captain Ukraine.
honestly, that is, even he himself, he came out and be like, I don't want to be a 300 story. Don't stop training this as the last stand of the heroic 300. That's bullshit.
And yeah, because it includes dying.
Yes, exactly.
But also, I mean, where there is a political niche for the pro-Ukrainian candidate, there is a political niche for the pro-Russian candidate. And we already see a lot of Trump supporters don't consider Putin to be that problematic. And so at the Republican Party, as
so smart.
we have to admit, is fully controlled by that guy's
But at least I think it's fair enough to say in
Faction.
Western Europe, there is no party that can score any political points by supporting Russia.
You would be surprised.
Not even if they are.
No. There the issue is something else, I fear. But the Flemish separatists, no, not the separatists, the fascist party, which just also
That's
happens to be. Yeah, they ditched. It's a remarkable thing. They kind of ditched their fascist brothers in Ukraine, because Ukraine has a big fascist militia problem. Not that Putin is actually handling those people, not at all. But they kind of ditched them in favor of good old Vladdy Daddy.
Right here.
So
I mean, honestly, like there was an action in Germany where people turned off their lights to show that they would rather sit in darkness this winter than support Russia in any way or like give them any money for
yeah,
gas.
it's still a hot issue. Like people will cool down.
I fear as well. After a few months,
After a few months of this,
drags
people are not going to be
out.
as interested. The conflict will get cold. This is the Cold War too.
I fear the same thing. I think it's
Actually,
it's easy to now to have a wave of solidarity, and especially let's also lower the temperature a little bit because the West isn't doing that much. Yes, it's sending a lot. It's throwing a lot of money at the problem again, and a lot of
Money and
weaponry and media, but that's mostly to. I mean, it also strengthens the position of the EU and NATO and the USA themselves in their own home countries because
And with their allied countries, like if you don't do anything right now, all of your allied countries who are not in NATO will be like, "What the fuck, guys?"
yes,
Like look at Sweden or
no, Sweden is not
Sweden.
They're also moving
Finland.
Not a part of it.
yeah,
either,
like
but
these countries
moving-
that are not part of NATO
Yes.
are gonna be looking like if
yeah, they actively are.
they'll be like, "Holy shit." We need like if NATO is showing support, and it's like if the official story is like we can't set boots on the ground because like Ukraine is not part of NATO. Every country
Yes,
like
yes.
it just helps the Western countries. It's just a smarter move. Can we just like do the obvious? Like we do agree that escalation of sending troops to Ukraine is stupid.
I would not love to have one statist power with nukes threaten another statist power with nukes. No.
Yes,
But
if
it's not threatening. It's if Ukraine is a neutral land.
the
NATO is a defensive pact, it claims. Of course, in the past it has shown defense can be interpreted pretty
Many
broadly. I mean, the
ways.
Belgium also has a Ministry of Defense, which is just the army ministry.
Basically, every country has a Ministry
Yeah.
of Defense, but it's basically
They seem to be very actively engaging to be just defendants always, but
But back to the point. So
I mean, nobody is questioning, I think. Nobody that has interacted with Putin is questioning whether he's serious about being willing to use nukes in case NATO intervenes. And nobody wants to see that because nobody wants to fucking die.
sure.
So-
no, I'm just like I'm getting out of the way. But like, okay, if that same thing happened in Germany, but not Ukraine.
yeah,
Yeah, but that's
exactly.
NATO. So then it's Putin's choice.
So I don't know. It's just like if you're looking at like the Ukrainian story, like what Zelensky is like, saying like you guys need to interfere.
Yes, of course, he's asking for it, which makes perfect sense from his perspective.
Yes.
He has to mobilize his population. It would be much, much easier and like his chances would increase massively if NATO troops would even like even not boots in Ukraine, just closing the Ukrainian airspace.
Yeah,
like
the no-fly zone
saying
is too
no-fly
much.
zone over Ukraine, so they can be bombed or like Russia wouldn't be able to drop troops or something like that. That alone would, of course, help massively because
But they can't do that. That
Ukraine
is
seems
basically
to-
an active declaration of war.
Yes,
Not
and
necessarily,
Putin has
but
That's
confirmed.
how Putin will interpret
Yes,
it.
he has confirmed
Yes.
today that he would interpret closing the Ukrainian airspace
Yes, exactly.
as a declaration of war with NATO. So
of course, Putin also says a lot of things, and then
yeah, but I've also like watched some advisors of him saying that the
I
man
wouldn't-
says what he means. If he
Okay,
says
but like if
something
he
very
says I'm
clearly.
going to Britain next, like I'm just like I don't understand the difference between
I mean, Britain would be a bit of a long haul. Some
he'd
other
have to
countries in
move through a
between.
few others. Yeah, but still, but no, but it's a valid point. And also, don't.
the salami
Like-
tactics.
Yes, exactly. And the salami tactics, for those that don't know, is like carving little slices more and more. Like you start with Crimea, and then you take like let's say the two republics of Ukraine that he now recognized, and then you take that slice of Moldova, which wants to be
You're
which
not going
wants
to
to be
do
part of
nuclear war
Russia.
over Moldova.
And then- exactly. And you're not going to do nuclear war over this and over that. But, you know, there are many options, and it's not unthinkable that NATO would say, okay, we'll both freeze on the nukes, but what happens on the ground happens on the
Conventional
ground.
forces
And
military campaigns
Yes,
will
you
happen.
You let an
I don't
army
I think
duke it out. It's not
yeah.
unthinkable. It's not just because we have nukes that everything is unthinkable, but also because we have nukes, this is not going to be World War III.
It only
the same
deters
way.
other nukes. It doesn't deter.
But the thing
military
is,
campaigns.
the conventional
That's an
troops
interesting
of
point.
NATO are much stronger than the Russian troops, especially now after they've been weakened by the invasion in Ukraine.
So
We would like we as
so he would lose and then he would nuke.
That's my fear in this situation. I think he knows that he can't win against the joint NATO forces, the regular forces, without using nuclear.
To be fair, there's also that is a completely valid fear, because you don't want to drive any state in a corner without escape, because then exactly the nuclear option becomes the option. Though there are other options,
You're not gonna
possibly.
put NATO forces in Russia.
No. But
obviously not.
NATO could. Again, the options are plentiful beyond imagination. You could have NATO saying Ukraine becomes neutral territory and we both keep our troops out. But for now, as long as yours stay in, ours stay in, and you could have that Cold War situation
Basically
where
back to whatever was happening
the
for the
status
last 20
quo,
years.
but with Ukraine now, of course, significantly leveled to the ground.
Sure, but at the same time,
Also, a
the NATO
nuke, it doesn't immediately... I kind of want to add this because there's a lot of talk about putting his nukes on high alert. The nukes of Russia are not like one button press away from launching towards Brussels or Berlin or Paris or Washington. There are 4 stages of alertness, and he just moved them from the lowest one to the 3rd one, which is still alarming, to be clear. But it's not like we're not at the point where he's going to start it.
We're not that close.
And also, even if he would launch a nuke, it's not unthinkable that he would launch a small strategic one in Ukraine to, let's say, scatter the Ukrainian army beyond their ability to regroup and provide resistance.
You wouldn't really
Or
retaliate from
simply drop it in the Black Sea as a show of force of I am actually willing to fire it. And even if it hits, that's the 3rd one, that's the worst scenario. Even if it was dropped on Brussels or Washington or any other city in the West,
our dear listener, we
It
live
is-
very close to Brussels.
it is not necessarily true, though they will always say yes, because that
they will
the
retaliate
tactic.
on
It is
Moscow.
not true that they will retaliate, let alone retaliate in full. There are these nuclear this is a very layered system, though it becomes significantly more open to risk and chance, of course, the higher we get in alertness of nukes. But the fear is justified. It's just there is also some reason still to not go out on the street and panic in full.
There's still no need to panic in the sense. I mean, I guess it's fair to say, before we have a nuclear war, we will have conventional forces wars. You never know. You might have to
not?
join the draft. I don't think it's gonna start with nukes.
Yeah, I'm keeping off that gender alternation for now.
No, you don't want the. I mean, I think here you have equal opportunity.
I think Belgium would be
Equal opportunity.
yes, and that is why it's a bad idea to demand equality when it comes to army service. No,
You're both getting drafted.
I wish they would reject me because I'm gay. That was a bad example of emancipation there.
Yeah, I mean, there was apparently a dude in Turkey, in the Turkey army, whose job it is to watch gay porn, basically, that people send in to prove that they're gay and can't join the army, which I find hilarious.
That is a funny story.
Then they probably employ one gay person. Also, interesting, mentioning Turkey for a second, it's interesting. This has also kind of driven a wedge between, or seemingly driven a little bit of a wedge between Turkey and Russia, because they used to be
Coming from Syria? No.
But
they've always had
recently-
very different opinions.
Yes, and Ukraine, the area of Crimea, etc., has been a contested field. But recent years, they have found each other,
They both
Erdogan
hit the
and Putin,
West.
exactly in their ugh, attitude towards the West in general. But now it's called, they're
Yeah,
getting.
it's very interesting to see Erdogan being like the hero we needed, not the one we deserved, or something.
Yeah,
That's not how I would put it.
Probably Putin expected a faster campaign to happen. But it's interesting to see how this is starting to have a chain reaction to for example, the Turkish
Yes.
position.
So have we? I'm not sure. Have we discussed whether it's anyone's specific fault or whose fault it is?
But like, if you want to play the blame game, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the blame game. Whose fault is it?
Putin.
I mean,
Tom.
I don't see a point in assuming blame, but I mean, yeah, one guy did send his troops into the streets and then is throwing bombs at on people's heads, and it is Putin.
It's a match.
It's a match.
I feel we should be very honest about it and unequivocally, denounce it. And
I agree.
I'm not one to be really concerned about the
And again, it's ridiculous
exact
to just
nuance
be,
of a resolution. The guy is at fault, and let's just say a big fuck you. And yes, that does not mean
so it's a nutcase.
it does not mean I'm necessarily a fan of bourgeois state imperialist power. On the other
And the
hand,
way they've been handling the situation
let's
for
all
more than
agree
40
that
years.
this is
Yes, the current events, or like even Crimea or Georgia.
Yes.
It's the thing is, like, again, like, you will need a shift in mentality for a lot of people who've always lived in democracies. Like, for Belgium to go to war, you need the Belgian people to elect their officials and their elected officials to agree to go to war.
yes.
In this situation, it's this one person.
and a few oligarchs.
Nah,
They didn't want this.
they're losing
Like,
money.
I'm sorry. In this case, we can't even blame it on those.
This but like it's not about the blame. It's just like it's a one man's decision in a authoritarian regime like that. That's Putin. But is there something that could have been done differently
Obviously.
from the West's perspective?
I mean, Russia and this is okay. So let me be clear. I do not like Vladdy Daddy. He's a very bad man.
We need to stop calling him
but
that.
let's be honest about it.
Let's leave your daddy issue behind.
Look, Russia should have been a part of NATO from the beginning.
Yes.
It is a problem there outside of it. And Putin actually at some point has said, we were supposed to be your allies. Now, I do not like a tyrant in the military alliance. I do not like the military alliance as it is constructed. But, all my leftist, socialist, ecological complaints aside, they should have been part of it. The reason France and Germany are not fighting wars now, are not fighting over like Alsace-Lorraine, or not,
Is because-
punching through Belgium once again, is because they're in an economic union together. It's because they're in NATO together. It's because their countries have become intertwined
Yes.
beyond separation. We've seen how shitty it has been for Great Britain, one who always was one foot in. It was even difficult for them to get out. Like,
I mean, even for Russia, like if you talk economically, the Russian economy and the European economy has been interdependent for a while now. Why do you think, like, the whole thing, there is talk of why did Germany depend so much on Russian gas? Why not invest more in renewables and green energy? And sure, that is like something that would be eventually the best
Yes.
for the planet. But there is a point to be made about interdependent eco-political unions. Like,
yes.
you do want to have a good relationship with Russia. It promotes peace.
Yes, it does. It in the long term, it still should be the goal.
Yes.
Of course, it's not going to happen with this autocratic regime in Russia.
The economy was like, there was ties, like you said, militarily. No, NATO did not invite Russia in. It always stayed
There was,
antagonistical.
2 seconds of considering that, but no.
No.
It didn't
It-
really. It was.
I mean, also like historically speaking, though, NATO was kind of created in order to repel Russia. So
Well, the Soviet Union.
yes.
And then, of course, Russia was,
Sure, the
considered
Russian
successor state.
The Russian Federation
though,
is legally
let's be
speaking
clear.
the continued entity of the Soviet Union.
They took over its goods and its furniture, but let's be clear, like,
not
Putin
the
has
same
always
thing.
been also very clear about
I am not a communist.
NATO was supposed to fight communism. We're not communists. Why are you antagonistic against us? Because let's be clear, that is also a bourgeois nation state right now. It's not a
But at the
perfect
same-
nation state, but not that doesn't exist. But it's a state the same way that you have other European states, except it's more autocratic. It looks like Hungary and
yes, there's like a lot of nuance to it, but in the heads of people, like it's still
yes. Russia
Yes.
is over there, and we're
like
over here
when
with the
my
Americans.
father was training in the army in Germany that was only allowed to be connected to NATO because they were only allowed to be defensive. They were actively training against the Russians, is how they
Yes,
would
of
call
course.
it, like.
But that's also the consequence of course, leftover propaganda and culture
Yes.
from the Soviet Union.
and no, but like that's why I'm saying like you can't expect like
No, but like even for the Russian citizen.
but if they wanted to, honestly, I would not. I think we would all be surprised if they wanted to. What the EU and the Americans could do in terms of propaganda in convincing us all that Russia is. Russia is historically a part of the European continent. It always has been one of the European great powers. Hence, it would only be logical for Russia to be part of the EU or blah blah blah. If they really wanted to, their propaganda machines, which are highly effective,
Yes,
could
but the
convince the populace.
the weak point of that propaganda would be when the European Union or America, let's call them the West, the collective West, when they want to put a country on this is a good country list, what's usually the requirement? Democracy, quote unquote.
And probably the USA doesn't want such a big power joined with other former big power. Let's not forget the USA likes its position of dominance,
Obviously.
which is a natural thing for such an institution to, as a US state, to want. But it likes its position, and it has always also been very clear that the EU powers shouldn't fully rearm. Like that was also partially remarkable about Trump. He was like, no, you have to pay your dues in NATO. And probably a lot of Americans were like, wait, but aren't we supposed to be the military superpower? We can't have the Germans and the French go running around again like children, also making claims and doing things their way.
If you're just looking at how much America spends on militaries,
Exactly.
and how much we do spend on militaries, like,
Do you really want to?
I will have to
mean,
give
they
this
are
one
raising
to the
it
US.
now.
But do you want the Russians to merge with the EU from the USA perspective?
Why not?
Probably not. The Russians have then
They
you
also
have, then you like bring back to life the old powers.
But we would be one country with peace and prosperity.
Not with the USA. They never had any intention of being one with the old world. It's also interesting.
I mean, they are
to-
literally a different continent.
Yes, exactly.
So, but, like,
they have
economically
always been
speaking-
very isolationist. The USA world interference thing really
Is this the
happened
same
during
USA
World-
that's built global economies and global capitalism and
No, exactly.
markets.
That is what happened after 2 world wars. Then they suddenly became
They saw the economic
the
benefit
player.
of that.
They became the world power. Well, they became one of 2 world powers, and then when the Soviet Union collapsed, they became the world power.
I mean,
But-
China is also like if we're speaking present,
It
they
has
are-
now.
Yes.
It is now catching up. Though still, I would still not put my money on China versus the USA.
not right. On what sense?
Don't underestimate the amount of the capital power of the USA and its military and the fact that
insane.
the amount of nukes
It's genuinely insane. How much money they put on their military?
Yes,
is absolutely insane.
But it wasn't in but Europe had similar levels, or like not that high, but it had way higher. Where 3% is scary for us, but it's nothing compared to what we used to spend on that.
Yes, and now we're gonna have to be spending much more. Because, like, for example, Germany announced that they're upping it now to 2%, I think.
Everybody hold their seatbelts. Like the Germans are rearming.
Yeah, like the Germans get like this one thing of like, hey, we need you in NATO to be like strong now because of this whole situation, and they're like, okay, we're upping our spending right now.
The entire Bundestag was like,
Yes, finally.
That's the scary thing to see. As a Belgian, like.
Okay,
time to resurrect Hitler.
Let's move on.
Rise from the dead.
Oh no.
Let's move on to the next point. We have seen, of course, as there is always in conflict, a large number of refugees fleeing Ukraine. I think it was above 1 million by now.
About 1 million people
about
are
1 million,
on the run.
But this number will continue to rise probably. We have also seen different ways of how both the media and politicians have reacted to these refugees compared to refugees from Syria, refugees from Afghanistan.
Or, just colored people in Ukraine trying to flee.
Yes, that has also been a large concern. So, yeah, obviously we don't feel great about that.
Yeah, but at the same time, like I will say, like it's usually normally like as someone who did like come to the country as a refugee, I wouldn't be the kind of person to like be like, why are you treating the whites like so different than you treated us? That's not like because that's just a horrible situation for everybody at the moment, and you just want peace and you don't want anybody to have to like become a refugee. But I will say that I think that like we have seen some examples. There was this reporter who was talking about these are like relatively civilized people. This is not Iraq.
Yeah, we're not used to seeing like these kinds of things happen in Europe.
Oh god.
Compared to the Middle East.
I mean, he even called Ukraine relatively civilized.
Yeah. And that he said after he said that he will weigh his words very carefully.
Yeah.
That is,
for example, that's not fun.
No, that is a system showing its true colors. Yes. That is,
and at the same time,
and they're white and nothing else.
I will also recognize, like there is historical ties between, for example, Poland and Ukraine. There is familial ties. There is families living across.
Historical experience. I get that the Polish of all people would, of course, be like, "Oh, you're running from the Russians? Yeah, we understand.
Yeah,
sure." But of course, it's good to also be reminded of the fact that the Polish state still seems to be the same Polish state that is also...
See, Keenan, like, when you fled Syria, you should have just had a big board with you being like Assad and Russia are collaborating. Please help us from the Russians.
No,
and then
because the West think that Putin and Assad are fighting against ISIS. So on the scale of badness, you have Putin, you have ISIS on top, right? This is the worst. This is the devil. Then you have Russians. So if Russians are fighting Islamists, we'll stand with Putin. But clearly that is not the story that's going on in Syria. Like Assad is always like portrayed as this, like
it's also,
not to get into the Syrian situation, but it's always like, oh, Assad, like I know that guy. He's like wearing a tie. He's not wearing a military uniform. He doesn't look like a dictator to me. And he's fighting ISIS, right?
He's not wearing a
Isn't
tie.
he the good guy? Isn't he the good guy? I mean, I've literally heard people say that.
And
so
it's also not just Poland. Poland is, of course, now very much in the spotlight as a neighboring country, and
because
as a country
it was so
that
antagonistic.
certainly acts very differently than we are used to seeing. But if we look at home, Belgium also is certainly very schizophrenic. Our migration secretary, our secretary of migration, certainly is also like, oh yes, I'm
but to
opening
be fair,
up money
that is a different minister.
It's a different minister. It's a minister.
No, I'm going to refer to him and his own actions a couple of months ago when there was a hunger strike by refugees from the Middle East and from Africa. And he basically was like, you shouldn't test my resolve on this. There is no way we will give in to your demands. And he was willing to let a lot of people starve and be and
that is not a good
He was a
look.
typical fucking xenophobic asshole, and now he's suddenly changing his rhetoric. Why?
Because
Because it's very easy to agree with, when Poland also agrees, etc., etc. He has no he has no spine. That's what it comes down to. He's a xenophobic little dipshit, and he's just seeing his opportunity to, give his character some dimension where
I think,
it
to be
is
honest,
lacking.
the Belgian, like if you're talking Belgium specifically, your foreign policy when it comes to immigrants and refugees has always been just following whatever the big guy is saying.
Yeah.
What's the stream? What's the mainstream like?
Yeah, usually.
Usually, it would be interesting more to look. I think is Germany, like both in the Syrian refugee status and like in the current Ukrainian. There's a lot of solidarity from Germany.
Yeah.
Clearly also Germany is like, what's after Ukraine?
I mean, also Germany and Ukraine, they just have like really big ties. Like,
Yes.
like the Klitschko brothers, for example, like
I don't know who these
very
people are.
famous boxers that are both now fighting in Ukraine. They have been living in Germany for a very long time and they're super famous there. And like seeing basically stars, like local celebrities fight in a war.
It just changed the whole like public
know?
opinion when it comes to. But like to be fair, the public opinion of racist assholes is still the same. If it's Ukraine, if it's like we've seen comments on refugee articles on the Belgian media, and it's like what? It's like why would I welcome a Ukrainian in my home? What if they decide to stay?
Yeah,
Oh.
that's the VRT comments that I read to you today. Yes.
But I mean, we shouldn't just. It's no point to simply complain about the fact that the racists are still here. Of course, they still are.
They're still here and they're racist towards everybody.
Well,
But
now I would
use
call
the
it
momentum.
xenophobic, not
Xenophobic, yeah.
Sure.
It comes. It often.
I
mean,
often
to
the
be fair,
racism is
a lot
just
of you guys,
used
you don't see
to.
Eastern Europeans as the same ethnicity, do you?
I do. I don't know.
You do, maybe.
It depends on what you consider. Well, how do you define ethnicity? I also don't see Ukrainians as the same ethnicity, but I find the entire
there
thing
is
to
usually
be.
like this whole like.
I don't see the
Eastern
Dutch as the same ethnicity.
Like, do you think in the US when, or maybe in the UK, like Eastern European immigrant worker, there is this whole like, if you go back before the Islamist racism, before the word refugee was tied to being brown,
Yes.
before all of the Middle East bullshit, before Iraq,
I mean, before that, there was the refugees in America that fled from the Second World War who were very
exactly.
white and
So
European.
the word refugee in recent memory has been like for a lot of people, oh, refugee. What do you think of? You think of some poor African, some poor Middle Eastern.
Yeah,
You have
and
a
you
very
think less
specific
of an
image.
Eastern European person.
Exactly, but before that, there was the Eastern European
yes,
refugees,
when
which
the-
were treated horribly.
When the wall fell, especially when the Berlin Wall fell, that was a big thing, and the Iron Curtain started to be dissolved. I mean, there was certainly a look of.
I mean, in Germany, like there was a lot of
Downwards
refugees
look.
from East Berlin fleeing to West Berlin.
Yes.
Yeah.
For example.
For the refugee, like just to not go too much into this topic, I think it's just you will hear some people being like, "Oh, why are you treating Ukrainians different? Like you didn't treat us very well." The point is, we want you to treat every refugee like with
Yes.
dignity.
Yes,
That's
please.
the point. It's not like, oh, you should also refuse the Ukrainians.
And
That
I
is not
think-
the point.
But I think there is a real opportunity here for those people that are now showing solidarity, that are doing, that are helping
To
people
retrospect a bit.
and to also push their own point of view, and I think they're very justified in doing it. They can and they should push like an international idea of solidarity, regardless of nationality and the way people look.
And not let what
And you should
country
just-
take the brunt.
Yes,
See, like, for
exactly.
example, like if it was only Poland taking refugees, it will eventually get overflown.
And Poland will start to sour on it.
Exactly.
And
it will
they'll
sour
stop.
and sour and sour, and then you will have the same repeat situation.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
just for the people who don't know, the country that took most Syrian refugees, and we're talking huge numbers here, is our neighboring country, Lebanon.
Yes, they
Like-
believe their population doubled.
Yes,
because of-
literally doubled. So it's just like there is this weird idea that why aren't you like going to your own country? No,
Like people try to stay as close as possible when they can
To home,
also.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and that has been documented in research.
The way
galore.
the way you avoid the souring is by having an international solidarity.
Yes.
We welcome refugees and we spread them over too. Like you don't want to focus on only the neighboring
Yeah,
country
you do it-
because
you do
will
it
fuck
together.
that neighboring country. So
Yes.
that's my opinion about the refugee status. And
Yes,
we've
I
also
very
seen
much
like
agree.
news of brown people escaping Poland, escaping Ukraine. People who are not Ukrainian have been literally put into different lines when it comes to the borders.
Yeah, and
No, people who
and
are Ukrainian,
stop.
but they just don't look.
No, they're not Ukrainian.
Okay.
They're not. They're like, for example, Egyptians. At least that's what I saw in the report.
Oh, you mean like tourists and stuff?
Yes, tourists,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
students,
Yes.
people
yeah,
who
a
are
lot of
just
people
living in
studying
Ukraine
there, being
are being treated like not the same. Which
Yeah.
is like, but these are like, if this is about humans fleeing a horrible situation, what's the difference? What difference does it make if you're Ukrainian or?
I mean, of
Egyptian?
course, it does make the difference that you do have a home country that you can go to.
But wouldn't you still be like, yes, certainly, sir, madam, come through here. There is
Yes,
the airport if you want to
exactly,
flee, please.
exactly.
Like, feel free to run away from the impeding bombs and tanks and people with guns pointed at you. It's remarkable that you still in such a crisis, of course, have to have to deal with that kind of bullshit.
Yes, but you still do.
Yes.
That I believe brings us to the
Yes.
future.
The future.
The future.
What should the future look like?
Um,
I want world peace
rainbows and roses and
and unicorns.
I'm going to bark like barf, like go sing kumbaya
You're
around
gonna
the fire.
bark.
Bark, also bark. Yes, I do bark a lot in political discussions.
You know, there's like a whole community for that kind of stuff here, Tom and
Oh
Antwerp.
God, are we referring to them again? Yeah,
we're done with the BDSM jokes.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess the future, I think we agree. Big lines. We'd rather have peace. You have like a whole peace movement going on with like.
Yeah, though I mean, I'm interested to see what analysis they will be making
Yes.
in the
Maybe
coming
give some
days
more
and weeks.
information because
I mean,
Just, in
you
general,
have
you have
a-
like all of these young people going to the streets, all around the international
and
community.
older people left
Older,
over from
younger,
like,
like-
the anti-nuclear protests,
Exactly.
etc.
Like people who are just like frustrated and want to do something, and they're like at least going in the street and be like, "We want peace.
Yes.
We call for I don't know for
The
Russia."
big important thing is how do you think it can be achieved, and especially how do you think long-term peace can be achieved? Because we have to you have to reason through this as a movement. I mean, it's not fun to do the work of states and etc. But whether you like it or not, you're engaged in politics if you're asking for something political to change.
Yes.
So how is it going to happen? Personally, I mean, I'm not a fan of either of NATO swooping in of either or. I would be more interested, and I think the strength or the possibility lies in the Russian people. You kind of have to convince them that this war is not worth it.
They are convinced,
that,
probably, or like at least the people who
certain
are not
parts-
brainwashed by the state media, who they don't have access.
And more than
like,
convinced, they need to act on that, and that is not easy because the Russian people are tied up and
There have been
brainwashed
large
24/7,
protests, so-
and they have guns pointed at their head. And
Just
if
like
they protest, they disappear.
to put everything into context, for example, today CNN left Russia. It's not operating in Russia anymore.
Bloomberg.
There's been a new law passed in Russia to like basically ban.
Yes, and
Any-
we have banned the Russian state things. It
So,
happens, and it
it's
makes
just
it more
like-
difficult
like if-
to
Talking
reach.
within Russia,
Yeah.
like within Russia, you only now have access to the state media.
Yeah, it makes it more difficult to reach them.
It's just a very difficult situation, and like you said, I really do think it's the best possible situation if we're thinking the future is for the Russian people to somehow, maybe the people around Putin, maybe the people in the close circle coming to their senses,
I think you need
trying to do
I-
something.
I think you need civil disobedience or the core of it. You need a strike.
maybe the Russian military.
You need
but
to.
can you imagine you being in the Russian military as a foot soldier
They
And
actually seem to not be that happy about
They are
the war
not.
themselves at the moment.
They're deserters. They're
It's
In that
it's an
sense-
army that is treated very shittily.
Yeah.
You know, they think going to Syria is a vacation.
Oh,
The Russian army, like, it's like if you know people in the closest circle in Russia, you'll be like, hey, could you send me to Syria? That's how bad it is.
probably
they
doesn't
are being
help that they have
underpaid.
to shoot
hey, the weather is
Ukrainians.
better.
The weather is better. And they basically have to shoot no one in Syria. The situation is almost like chill now. And when they have to engage in combat, they are like much more elite. They have better weapons. They're better supplied than the Syrian army. But
It's
I
like
digress.
the Russians don't. I imagine many Russian soldiers don't really want to be in Ukraine because why would you? Okay, maybe some that believe in this great Russian empire, blah 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 blah. But
Most Russian-
I mean, the majority of them, they have close ties with Ukraine, which probably does not make it easier. I imagine it's very difficult for like.
What does the remind me?
Germans-
Does the Russian Federation have mandatory drafts?
I don't know, but I wouldn't be
That
surprised. if
I
they-
wouldn't be surprised. I don't think this whole army is volunteers.
And the Ukrainians don't really have anywhere else to go. They're
Exactly.
in their home and they're bloody well like certain they want to defend it.
I don't
seems.
think it's a solution to just abandon Ukraine and make it into a dead zone. Like
That might be the outcome of two states in the long term.
what is
just
that?
Not giving up.
That
but
is that area between the North Korea and South Korea, the demilitarized zone,
yeah, yeah.
quote unquote, the demilitarized. It's
Yes,
literally the most militarized
zone.
zone in the world. But like, you can imagine something like that in Ukraine. But the problem is, Ukraine is a full country with its people and its culture and its heritage and its will and sovereignty. It is their decision. Like, I agree that I don't want them to join NATO. To be honest, I think
Well,
that
NATO
would
can say no.
sure NATO can say no, but isn't it like in Ukraine's?
No, NATO decides in the end.
Yes. But it is the Ukrainian people's right to at least apply without
Yes.
fearing that Russia will just be crazy.
Yes.
That my ex is talking to this American asshole, I will kill her. That
And
is
then
not how
actively try and kill her.
Yes, that is not how politics should work. Ukraine
Yeah.
should be allowed.
Wow.
It is their right, no matter what geopolitical problems. Just because they're a borderland does not mean that we need to treat them differently. It is their right to engage with Europe, to trade with Europe, to maybe even apply to join in NATO. Now, I don't think NATO should accept that admission because it would be too risky. But it is the Ukrainian people's right to decide that for themselves.
Yeah, I believe every group of people has the right to self-determination. But I mean, you also, in terms of what needs to happen, I think you need to see one thing. I don't think the Ukrainians should give up or anything. I think though you're really going to need to influence Russia and try and create a general strike, really directly dry up the military machine of Russia and its bourgeoisie and its like class of capitalists, so that to the point where they're like, this is not profitable for us anymore. We want to trade with the rest of the world, with the other bourgeoisie, because that's what bourgeoisie want to do.
And then you
They
get
want to be
poisoned.
But I do
bourgeois.
think
And then you have a drink of your water and you die mysteriously.
I do think the thing of wanting to create a general strike in Russia is also a bit like a difficult ask.
It's extremely
coming.
difficult.
Can I?
Yes.
It's coming from someone sitting in Belgium. You know, like it's
Yes.
you will be like, if you post a Facebook post saying that this military attack was a military attack and not like something to save Ukrainians from Nazis, you can technically get 15 years in prison right now.
Yes.
That's if you get
I'm not.
caught.
I'm
That's for
not.
a Facebook post.
I am not suggesting in any way that this is not life-threatening, dangerous. But if we want long-term stability, then that Russian state cannot continue to exist as it does.
I agree with
It
that.
needs to become more democratic. It needs to become more accountable to its people, and that is. I don't see it happening from outside.
There
I
is
don't
no
see it
much-
happening.
There is no
Either
amount
you
of
leave it-
influence that the EU can do on Russia if the Russian people themselves don't check. Like, what are you gonna do? Invade Russia? There you go, nuclear war, World War III.
I mean, right now what they're doing is trying to target the oligarchs,
Sure.
taking away their yachts, taking away their money,
It's really like
freezing their accounts.
again, I you know my opinion about sanctions. I don't think they're that effective. Even when you sanction the oligarchs, you still affect the people.
Yes, but
It's
freezing someone rich, like their account, doesn't really affect the
It's
people.
gonna suck, but it's like, oh, I guess I couldn't go to my third mansion. But you can't complain too much because Putin will kill you.
Yes, but like if you have a lot of money, maybe you should kill Putin. That's what I'm saying.
Ha ha ha.
Like,
And then you have another.
Can't we send the
oligarch at
Avengers
top.
to Russia? Can't we send the Avengers to Russia?
I'm sorry to tell you, Kinan, but the Avengers aren't real.
If the Avengers were real, do you think it would be morally right and ethical for them to intervene in Russia? To go and arrest Putin?
I don't want to say what one imperialist state should do to the other one. I don't freaking care. I still think the people in Russia should cause an insurrection rather than.
What if the people of Russia agree with his whole thing?
what if the
They're
people
fairly-
of Russia don't want to fucking die?
Exactly.
Like,
They already are in a war.
well, some of them are.
Yes.
Not all of them are.
And over time, more and more will.
Do you think it's a valid strategy for the West to? I told Morgan this before. I hate boiling down politics to one person. To analyze Putin's psychology or his fucking mental deterioration. I don't care about him. I should not care about him.
You're gonna ask
but I
to
have
shoot him.
No, I'm asking is, just what's the word? Just keep it cool for 15 years until he has a heart attack.
Like wait him out.
Yeah. Like, what's the political situation in Russia once Putin
Then you're
dies?
leaving the Ukrainians out to dry.
I mean,
Are you
that's what's
comfortable
gonna
with that?
happen.
You're still sending them money and armies. Not armies, weapons.
Well, you're doing what you can, but right now we can't do anything more, anyways, can we? Like, we can't send people boots on the ground.
I do think
That would be NATO, yes.
Yeah.
from the West's perspective, you can't do anymore. I do think it would be too.
I don't like NATO intervening either because
Yeah.
nukes on both sides.
Yes.
But I think the only alternative to that is
you
to
do have to
run
think-
dry the Russian system on the other hand. And the only people that have the power to do that, really the power to truly
Stop the
slow
Russian
the machine and even slow it or stop it completely are the Russians themselves.
or the Avengers.
Which basically means not necessarily that I'm telling them to do this. I'm basically just on my knees begging them, please.
You would save the whole planet, maybe.
I do think the West and all of the peace movement that exists in the West should 100% support them if they do with anything they need.
Definitely, yeah.
Like,
Yeah, but
Clearly. Like, if the Russians
but
take that
also-
step,
but also,
And the Ukrainian people who are currently seeing a tank waltz through their street, they also deserve all the help.
But
they
also supporting, because what you're saying is the West should support
I'm saying
rebellious groups.
people.
Rebellious groups within Russia should be supported by the West to overthrow their president. That's what you're saying.
no
right now.
civilian.
I'm saying the people here, not necessarily their state, should help people in Ukraine and in Russia to end this war.
Oh, so you're saying like European people, like
If, I will say this, if NATO and the EU would cause an insurrection in Russia, I'm not going to say that's a bad thing to do.
Yeah, what about the CIA operation, let's say?
I think that's also declaring war on Russia.
Is it, though?
Yes.
That is not
You're
declared.
literally going into their country and trying to overthrow a president.
Let me just say, historically speaking, CIA missions that are like undercover, like that. The reason why they do it that way is because it's not declaring war. If you can replace the regime without declaring war,
Well, if.
I mean, they
Yeah,
have done
exactly.
it.
It's all a big
in a lot
if.
of times. Like they've done it in
And the Americans can be highly effective in creating unrest and replacing a regime. That is the entire complaint the peace movement has against and all people that are now saying and no against NATO. That's the complaint they make against NATO. It's a power that constantly interferes and topples regimes left and right, whatever it wants to. And that's a completely valid complaint. But then why don't the Americans, target their full-on beautiful propaganda machine the same towards Russia, the same way they did it in Serbia?
To be fair, the US is also itself just very separated at the moment. And some would say, if you're like really looking at the Russian-US narrative, this whole thing has been like planned for basically 7-8 years since Trump was elected. And you have this big...
Longer. It's the entire reason NATO exists. It's why they ramp up their budgets.
Yeah, but I mean like the specific thing of... The US now does not have a very decisive... Within the US, like a very decisive take on this whole Russian situation. The Republicans are like... Like, honestly, that is a big deal. Not to say that the US is the most important country in the world, but if half of that country, like the other party, it's a two-party system. If one of the parties is like, I don't know, man, like maybe Russia isn't that bad.
Yeah?
Yeah, that's just like, that's just weak. That's weak sauce.
Okay. So how do we feel about it? Let's end on like a personal note, maybe, to not,
And on weak sauce.
And on weak sauce, indeed.
Just was like the last thing for like peace. Basically, I mean that does also play with our own emotions. I don't know about you guys, but personally, I am like, I do want peace. I would be out there like protesting for peace if I knew exactly what I want. What's
do you want, Keenan?
I don't know. What do I want from the Belgian government or the NATO government or the European Union?
I don't want much from the government.
Like, can they do anything?
They can support. The best they can do at the moment is support people in Ukraine resisting that invasion, and they could support those in Russia that try
How
already
do you support
to.
the people in Russia?
You could try and get political asylum for those that have to flee. You could give resources to others.
Announce bounties. There is this Russian oligarch who like announced a bounty on Putin's head.
Yes, for 1 million.
That's one cheap asshole. Like 1 million? That's it?
It's probably not the richest of the oligarchs.
It's just very funny. Like imagine risking your life, murdering Putin for a fucking million.
I feel like he's worth more than that, considering the situation.
To be honest. How do you feel, Tom? How have you been feeling about this whole...
He suddenly starts to feel like a therapy session.
Yes,
I mean, maybe it is. Like, we haven't seen each other in a long time. Like, also, we apologize to our listeners who are very devout listeners. We have not done this podcast in a while. I believe it's been like 4 weeks or something. We are planning to keep doing this every 2 weeks. The word would be bi-weekly, but I've actually learned that is not correct use of that word.
It isn't?
It isn't. Apparently, the word bi-weekly does not mean every 2 weeks. The word bi-weekly means twice a week.
Yes.
But it has been used too much that the dictionary now defines it both ways.
Oh.
But anyway, to wrap up, we haven't done this podcast in a while, so we do plan to keep it going.
So Tom, you wanted to tell us about...
Obviously, I'm shit scared. Let me be very honest about and clear about that. Though it's sad to say, but doing so much on climate change and also watching a lot of videos of floods happening in various parts of the world and fire and forest fires, etc., it kind of also I won't say numb because I still internally panic, but the external panic maybe is diminished a bit because of it.
You have been traumatized to the extent where
desensitization.
Yeah, like the outside is a bit of a blank.
The physical response.
Yes,
altered.
Exactly. The internal emotional response is still the same. It's still very much like Greta Thunberg says, like panic. I want you to panic.
I mean, like personally, I think coming out of a situation of a pandemic where we've been isolated for 2 years, then being confronted with another cop which our last episode was about, where we felt deeply disappointed by the lack of willingness to take action, and now being confronted with another life-threatening, possibly, life-threatening situation. And for a lot of people, it is a life-threatening situation. It does feel like, maybe our parents shouldn't have had children or something at this point in
Can we
time.
agree the past generation is not doing a good job?
Yeah.
Please hand over power to the
they
people
should have solved their
obsessed.
shit before they had children.
We will just. I know it sounds bad to you guys, but we will just create a ministry of TikToks or something. What can go wrong compared to this?
I mean,
It will be less problematic, I feel like.
I'm just saying, you could look up TikTok problematic stuff.
Yes,
But,
yes.
Okay.
Personally, I mean, do I
Yeah.
get to say
I
how
thought you
how I've
started
been
with
feeling?
saying what
No,
you-
I asked
No,
Tom
Keenan,
how he
your
was
feelings
feeling.
don't matter here. No.
Yeah.
Please go, my friend.
I mean, yeah, I guess basically the same as you guys. We have been talking about what should we keep in the car for an emergency situation. I have lived through war before, so my thoughts do go to Ukrainian people. And I hate to say it, but basically thoughts and prayers, that's all I can say. I know how much of a horrible situation it is. It's very vivid to look at the pictures and the videos and to see the kind of destruction that happens when you do war in a civil city. This is not a middle of nowhere. This is where people used to live. This is...
And I mean, in
It's
the
horrible.
short term, there is, if the moment you type stand with Ukraine or support Ukraine, you'll probably find places, organizations to donate to. Just make sure that they
Exactly.
actually go to the Ukrainian people. You'll probably find some Russian dissident groups that want this war to end just as badly
Definitely.
because they do not want to kill other people. And one thing to directly do to the governments and states you have in the West is to just fucking force them to take in refugees without the xenophobia. Really tighten
Yes.
the thumb screws.
Yeah.
So
Threaten
let's-
them.
There is more than enough resources and space
re-elections.
to go around. If we show solidarity right now, it will only... I don't know, man. You will get good karma. What's better than that?
Yes. So let's support them where we can. Let's support the Russian civilians where we can, civilians to civilians, and let's try to end this in the best way possible. And let's, of course, also acknowledge all the losses that have already happened and, that will probably still occur in the coming days. Let's just hold a moment of peace and silence after this podcast and, commemorate them. Thank you for listening and have a lovely evening or day or whenever you're